Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Police say the teenager who killed 9 people in Munich yesterday was obsessed with shootings. He's been named locally as 18-year-old David Sonboli, a German-Iranian student who had psychiatric problems. A search of his home found literature about mass killings. Officials say there's no evidence to link him with extremist groups such as so-called Islamic State. Sonboli was armed with a 9mm pistol and later shot himself. Well, let's go live now to Munich and to our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt. Gavin.
For some time, Germany has feared that it too could face attacks from groups with links to the so-called Islamic State. That didn't happen here. Instead, an 18-year-old who was highly disturbed and who liked watching violent videos brought terror to the streets of Munich. It was the third attack on civilians in Europe in 8 days. A gunman killing 9 people at random in a Munich shopping centre. It has left the country wondering where was safe, said Angela Merkel. The gunman was caught on camera opening fire. He's been named as David Ali Sonboli, a German of Iranian descent. The 18-year-old student had battled depression. Police found evidence he had researched other frenzied attacks, including the killings in Norway 5 years ago by the right-wing extremist Anders Breivik. But the police said there were no indications so far the killings were motivated by politics.
All the indications are that he was acting on his own, a sole perpetrator, and we believe there are no links to immigrants or immigration.
After a recent attack here in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, the federal government has been very keen to establish motive, to reach that point where it can say with confidence that the gunman had no links with Islamist or other militant groups. One of those who witnessed the shooting said the gunman seemed to lack any training.
He didn't appear a normal person. I thought he might have taken drugs or been drunk. I felt he was a complete amateur. He was definitely not a professional.
Police are investigating whether the gunman tried to lure young people to McDonald's by offering them free food on a Facebook page. 7 of the victims were teenagers. The government said the horror had been made much more difficult because there had been such terrible news from elsewhere in Europe in recent days.
We are in deep and profound mourning for those who will never return to their families. The families, siblings, friends, to whom everything will be void and empty today.
On the streets of Munich today, there was a sense of insecurity.
I waited for an attack like that in Germany, but I didn't expect that it will happen in Munich.
Just around the corner.
Yes.
Johanka Russo went on to ask, what's next? Are we going to die? What's going to happen to my kids? The German Chancellor described the attack as a night of horror. Over 2,000 police deployed, a city's transport system shut down, and 9 lives lost. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Munich.
Well, the victims of yesterday's attack were predominantly young and of foreign origin. 3 of the 9 were Turkish, 3 were Kosovan, and 1 was from Greece. Chris Buckler's report on the victims contains some distressing details.
In Munich, many feel the shooting was an attack on a generation. The majority of those being mourned were teenagers, and children were among the injured. There are people here in need of support. Among them Hussein, who held one of the young victims as he died.
I was shocked, I was scared, and I threw my bike to the side. And then I lay down here, right next to him. I saw that he was badly injured. He'd been shot 3 times. And then he looked me in the eyes, took one deep breath, and died. My life is divided in 2 now. I'll never be able to forget what happened.
That teenager's friends brought pictures of him to place at the spot where he died. determined that he would be remembered in the street where they used to meet. It's insane, one of them says. Why were young people specifically targeted? Detectives are still struggling to try to understand why these murders were committed. But those questions of motivation are dwarfed here in Munich by simple, raw emotion. Alongside the grief, there is also a sense of vulnerability after this latest attack in Europe. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Munich.
Good evening. German police say the lone gunman who killed 9 people in a mass shooting in Munich last night had no links with so-called Islamic State. But they added that the 18-year-old had been receiving medical and psychiatric treatment, and they found documents about mass shootings in his flat. As tributes were paid to the victims, Chancellor Angela Merkel said her country was in deep and profound mourning. From Munich, here's our security editor, Rohit Kacharu.
It is hard for anyone here to understand. But where today flowers were laid, yesterday shots were fired. The shots that killed 9 people. The father of one of the victims returned to the scene today. That was my son, 21 years old, he said. His killer was 18, born and raised in Munich. David Somberly was described as a deranged loner, a classical shooter without political motivation. Not a terrorist, said German authorities, but perhaps inspired by one. His attack began outside a McDonald's restaurant yesterday afternoon. 9 people were killed, nearly all youngsters. Armed police stormed in as shoppers raced out. He was obsessed with mass killers. At his home, police found a study of the psychology behind school shootings. And perhaps most significant of all, they've confirmed the link to Anders Breivik, the far-right terrorist who killed 77 people in Norway. Yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the killings. Bavaria's interior minister said, there are clues that the perpetrator had been looking into rampages for some time and that he was collecting information on that. Until yesterday, his neighbours knew him only from his newspaper delivery round, undelivered today, his name all over them. In his suburban apartment block, a former school friend said she saw him hours before his attack.
He don't look at me. Actually, he always look at me and say hello, but yesterday he doesn't, and that was weird. I asked myself why he said not hello.
Germany's Chancellor led national mourning today.
Für die heute alles leer und sinnlos erscheint.
She said, life must now seem empty for their families. We suffer with you.
Wir teilen ihren Schmerz.
The victims were killed, not by a foreigner, but by a member of this community, and someone whose disturbed mindset was well known.
So, Rohit, what now for the police investigation?
Well, one crucial question is where the attacker obtained his firearm. Germany has the highest levels of gun ownership in the European Union, one of the highest levels in the world, but it also has strict licensing laws, and he didn't have a license to own that 9mm Glock handgun. Another question is whether anyone else was involved. They're checking social media accounts. They've discovered that he posted on Facebook yesterday, hacking into someone else's account, inviting people to come here with the promise of free food around the time of the attack. One assumption that has been blown away today was the initial thought that he might have been linked to a terrorist group. It is now clear, it seems, that he was inspired by a group of deranged and infamous gunmen around the world, of which he is one.
All right, for now, Rohit, thank you.
He was just 18 with a history of psychiatric problems, but the young gunman, unofficially named as David Ali Somboli, killed 9 people at a Munich shopping centre before turning his weapon on himself. He had been born and raised in Munich and had no links to the self-styled Islamic State group, but he carried out his attack on the 5th anniversary of the Anders Breivik attacks in Norway. Paul McNamara's report contains images some viewers may find distressing.
The aftermath of a massacre that claimed the lives of mostly teenagers. Clutching a picture of the son he will never see again, Naeem Zabeya arrived at the Olympia shopping centre today and laid flowers where his child died. At 20 years old, Digimant was one of the oldest victims. Fear descended on the entire city of Munich last night as rumours of a terror attack carried out by multiple gunmen circulated. But the truth was far simpler. Armed with a single handgun, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, a lone 18-year-old changed countless lives forever. From the McDonald's he moved to a shopping centre, killing 9 people along the way, the youngest just 13 years old. One brave onlooker filmed this exchange and asked what his motives were. This was his reply. The gunman has been named in German media as David Ali Somboli, born and bred in Munich. According to the police, he had no links to the self-styled Islamic State and no political affiliations. A raid of his home unearthed documents and articles about frenzied attacks and a book called Why Students Kill. The Munich chief of police said Somboli appeared to be obsessed with shooting rampages. He had also previously received psychiatric treatment, including for depression. But police are investigating possible links to Norwegian right-wing mass murderer Anders Breivik. Yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of his rampage that killed 77. Today, neighbours described Somboli as a quiet boy. This neighbour saw him just hours before the attack.
We always said hello to each other, but never anything more. But yesterday I got a Red Bull from the cafe and smoked a cigarette. I saw him with his father. He didn't even look at me, didn't say hello. He just went away. I thought to myself, what's wrong with this guy?
The shockwaves from these gunshots were felt across Europe. There was a minute's silence before today's leg of the Tour de France. Angela Merkel said the entire nation was grieving.
We are all mourning with a heavy heart for those who will never return to their families. To the families, parents and children for whom everything now seems empty and meaningless, I say personally, and in the name of many, many people in Germany, we share your pain, we're thinking of you, and we're suffering with you.
10 killed, including the gunman, 27 injured, and the question looming, just how was an 18-year-old able to get hold of this lethal weapon and hundreds of bullets?
Paul McNamara reporting.
I've been